From its early 18th century roots, the modern socialist movement invariably included the women's rights question, or what we presently call feminism, and socialists everywhere in the West are unanimous in advocating one of the necessary implications of feminism, which is the politicization of the sexes. While socialism is merely the demand for a leveling between the lower orders of humanity with the more abled, so feminism is a demand for the full spectrum equivalence of women with men. The two have in common that they both seek excessive equality, and in this they both violate nature, for the one is contrary to the organic constitution of society, and the other to the natural constitution of the human body. They both aim at emancipation, as it is termed, or the freeing from bondage, but socialism only excites class consciousness, stirring up revolutionary forces that desire an end to civilization, whereas feminism wholly elicits sex consciousness, which ultimately leads to sexual antagonism. Their advocates have deliberately confused the notion of justice, in whose name they demand very specific rights, and because of which they dogmatically believe their claims so self-evident that they must speedily be achieved at all cost. Feminists and socialists have impossible and perhaps malevolent expectations, and thus are willing to use cultural institutions as fuel, upon which they heap the remains of the previous natural order. Moreover, as weaknesses develop in advanced civilizations, such as the reduction in self-employment and rootlessness, a vacuum opens up which allows for the rise of socialism and feminism. There is, therefore, in each case, a real problem. In the former, to restore to the majority of men the means of employing themselves and a renewed attachment to the land and nationhood, and in the latter, to draw the majority of women back from gynarchic fanaticism and into the home, where family and child-rearing are central occupations. Only as the leveling of weaker men with the strong cannot solve social issues, as can be historically observed, so, as we shall one day see, the equalization of women with men will simply not allow the continuance of those primordial natural relations between man and woman, and the advocates of these artificial solutions resemble each other in their complete disregard to adapting means to ends, and of foresight as to the dire consequences, like children playing with fire, as both expect, with equal optimism, to transform dedication and work into amusements in a carefree, spiritually devoid, and materialist world, where joy and pleasure can be mathematically divided according to whatever social justice scheme is the fashion of the day. Indeed, the panaceas proposed in both cases are exactly the opposite of what they ought to be, having the tendency to increase the so-called evils they are intended to cure. The social conditions proffered as such remedies have in fact both existed in primitive times, as Neolithic communalism and tribal matriarchy, but those times were part of a long drawn-out, almost stationary period of pure savagery and barbarism prior to the dawn of civilization, which only began after these were superseded, the first by private property creation, the other by male supremacy. Both have likewise in historical times been imperfectly tried and, without exception, failed with the most disastrous results. In fact, these attempts have always attended a cultural decline. Raw feminism is, therefore, not new, any more than socialism. The modern movement, with its elaborated doctrine, is merely a product of the security and affluence of the West's post-industrial age, but its birth, without the complete liberal socialist theory in which it is presently wrapped, has appeared in the past. In the European context, the literal emancipation of women, or the taking of them out from under the hand of their husbands, first occurred by the aid of foreign legal fictions in Rome, as it rose in the cycle of its civilization toward the point we have reached in ours. Women then enjoyed the freedom of owning the property bequeathed to them by their parents or acquired by their own efforts or speculations. Their indirect influence on legislation affected the repeal of the Oppian Law against luxury in 195 BC, after Cato's speech, arguing against its revocation, caused 1,000 women of wealth, alongside the city's entire brothel community, to throng the streets and besiege the doors of those opposing tribunes. The serious and deleterious influence of women on Roman politics became noticeable thereafter, helping to hasten the end of the Republic, and continued unabated during the Imperium, during which period, curiously, a massive spike in African and Near Eastern immigration occurred. A century later, women were even admitted into the forum to practice as lawyers, but the social issues they forwarded merely stagnated the court system, and, after the scandalous public conduct of a certain Caia Afarania, they once again became excluded altogether from Rome's legal affairs. Feminism in the West had a slow development after the fall of Rome, when decadent social constructs evaporated and the harsh realities of the natural order were reaffirmed throughout Europe. During periods of anarchy or social collapse, it would emerge to varying degrees, but finally found its momentum, not unpredictably, after the French socialist revolutions of 1789 and 1848 and the Paris Commune of 1871. During this epoch, the contrived social issues of liberal socialist philosophy were mainstreamed by the media networks and publishing houses throughout Western civilization, and egalitarianism, or social equality, became synonymous with the women's rights movement, thereby merging socialism and feminism within the modern liberal political construct. And now that liberalism itself has become the operating cultural dogma controlling the West, the result of this partisan marriage has been the reduction of the individual rights of all, meanwhile feminizing men and masculinizing women. The nature of our world has always been to differentiate the sexes, and exceedingly so within the human population, producing hundreds of secondary sexual traits, in addition to the primary difference of reproductive function. This process is contemporaneously illustrated both by the fact that in less civilized regions of the earth, the physical contrasts between man and woman are more difficult to observe, and by the fact that in the young, these physical traits are even much less marked than in the full-grown. This development has proceeded for nearly 80,000 years, and cannot be undone in a few generations without the extinction of entire races, with particular risk given to Europeans, being genetically more fragile and complex than any others. But at the culmination of the advanced stage of a liberal socialist civilization, and in the case of Europe and the West more generally, the trend will be to mold men and women into social and economic units. And, as both of these lead men to easier, safer, and more comfortable circumstances, which were sooner obtained for women, while reducing the totality of men to subordination, even subjection, within the nexus of a highly developed, postmodern society and state, its effect will be to make women out of men, rather than men out of women, for sternness gives way to mildness, and the masculine virtues recede before the feminine, because it is easier to make the hard and strong soft and weak, than it is to make the soft and weak hard and strong. If women become the apes of men, they cannot make up for the loss of real manhood on the part of men, and the nations in which this tendency goes furthest are inevitably exposed as prey to those in which the men have remained as such, especially so when the gates to those nations are thrown wide open, allowing the peoples of the underworld to enter them uncontested. It can therefore be said that the whole operation of modern feminism and liberal socialism is to consciously and purposefully increase this ruinous process. But there is one final, more fundamental assumption made by feminism. Just as socialism wishes all classes and races to be melted down into one monolithic pool, so does feminism wish society to blind itself to every difference of sex, including the primary when this is beneficial, and to treat all individuals as specimens of a single kind of entity. Yet this merely removes those qualities that principally make the woman a human being in the first place. And perhaps this is what feminism and its partisan political movements have desired all along: the fall of the human soul, and an end to humanity as nature had ordained it.